My ex-wife tried to ruin my life after losing in court, but I turned her schemes against her and got the last laugh. It started as an ordinary Tuesday. I was halfway through my third cup of coffee, scrolling aimlessly through emails at work when a message notification popped up on my phone. It wasn't the usual spam or a calendar reminder. It was a text from my best friend, Mike. Mike, hey man, you sure about that business trip Rachel mentioned? I just saw her at the Cove Hotel with some guy. At first, I thought he was mistaken. Rachel, my wife of 8 years, had told me she was going on a work retreat. She even showed me the itinerary, a glossy PDF with corporate branding, complete with a schedule of meetings and seminars. But Mike wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I responded, "Are you sure it was her?" Mike replied almost immediately, "Positive." I didn't say anything, but I saw her checking in at the desk. She wasn't alone. My hands went cold. The room seemed to tilt ever so slightly. For the rest of the day, I was a mess. I replayed every interaction with Rachel over the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been distant? Distracted? Come to think of it, she had been spending more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. She brushed it off as work stuff. I decided not to confront her immediately. If Mike was wrong, I'd risk blowing up my marriage over nothing. But if he was right, I needed proof. That night, Rachel called me, her voice cheerful and upbeat. "Hey babe, how was your day?" she asked. "Busy," I lied. "How's the retreat?" "Oh, exhausting," she said, sighing for effect. "We just wrapped up a team-building workshop. I'm about to crash, but I wanted to check in." My throat tightened. She sounded so convincing, so genuine. "I miss you," I said. "Miss you too," she replied, and then quickly added, "Gotta go. Early start tomorrow." After the call, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt, anger, and heartbreak. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was going to the Cove Hotel. The next day, I called in sick and drove 2 hours to the hotel, my mind racing the entire time. What if Mike was wrong? What if Rachel saw me and turned this into a huge misunderstanding? When I arrived, I parked a block away and entered the hotel lobby, trying to look casual. The desk clerk barely glanced at me as I loitered near the elevators. I scanned the area for any sign of Rachel, feeling like a spy in my own life. After 20 minutes, I spotted her. Rachel was standing near the bar, laughing at something a man said. He was tall, well-dressed, and far too familiar with my wife. She touched his arm, a gesture she hadn't made toward me in months. My stomach churned. There it was, the proof I'd hoped I wouldn't find. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. My instincts screamed at me to confront her right then and there, but I knew better. A scene in the middle of a hotel lobby wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I retreated to my car and called Mike. "You were right," I said, my voice shaking. "She's here. With him." "Damn, man," Mike replied, his tone somber. "What are you gonna do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but she's not getting away with this." That night, I sat in my car outside the hotel, watching as the lights in Rachel's room went out. I couldn't bring myself to leave. The betrayal was unbearable, but so was the thought of giving her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she'd hurt me. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, an idea began to form, a way to confront her that she wouldn't see coming. Driving back home after that sleepless night outside the Cove Hotel, I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and determination. Rachel thought she was clever, living a double life without a care. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it, not without making her feel the weight of her betrayal. By the time I reached my driveway, a plan had begun to take shape. If Rachel wanted to play games, I'd make sure the final move was mine. That morning, I called my lawyer. Linda had handled a few legal matters for me in the past, and I trusted her discretion. "Linda, I need to file for divorce," I said bluntly. She was silent for a moment before responding, "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there a reason you're moving so quickly?" "There's infidelity," I replied, my voice tight. "I have evidence, photos, and a witness. I don't want this to get messy, but I need to protect myself." Linda agreed to start drafting the paperwork immediately. Next, I contacted Mike. I need one more favor, I said. Name it, he replied without hesitation. Can you help me find out who the guy is? Rachel's, whatever he is, I said, barely able to stomach the words. Mike didn't need convincing. By the end of the day, he sent me a text with the man's name, a LinkedIn profile, and a few key details. His name was Scott. He worked in finance and lived a few towns over. From what Mike found, Scott wasn't married, but he had a reputation for networking a little too closely with married women. I clenched my fists, reading the text. It was worse than I thought. Rachel wasn't just cheating. She was with a serial homewrecker. By the time Rachel returned home from her retreat, I had everything in place. She walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened. Hey babe, I'm back. How was your weekend? I forced a smile. Busy. Glad you're home. She kissed my cheek, and I had to fight every instinct not to recoil. Work was exhausting, she said, dropping her suitcase by the door. But it was worth it. We made some great connections for the company. I nodded, playing along. That's great to hear. You must be tired. You have no idea, she said with a laugh. I'm going to take a long shower and then crash. As she disappeared upstairs, I sat on the couch, staring at her suitcase. Part of me wanted to confront her then and there, but I knew it wasn't time yet. The following week was surreal. Rachel acted like everything was normal, dinners together, laughing at her favorite shows, even suggesting a weekend getaway just for us. Every moment felt like a performance, her lies hidden beneath a polished exterior. Meanwhile, I continued to work with Linda, finalizing the paperwork and preparing for what would come next. The opportunity to set my plan in motion came sooner than I expected. One evening, Rachel left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to check the laundry. It buzzed with a notification, a message from Scott. I couldn't resist. I unlocked the phone. She never changed her passcode and opened the message. Scott, had a great time last weekend. Can't wait for our next trip. Winking face. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to focus. I scrolled through their conversation, taking screenshots of every damning message. There were photos, too, selfies of the two of them, arm in arm at the hotel bar. By the time Rachel returned, I had her phone back on the counter and a new determination burning inside me. That night, I told her, I have a work trip next weekend, out of town. Oh, she said, feigning interest. Yeah, it came up last minute, I lied. I'll be gone Friday through Sunday. Okay, she said casually, not even trying to hide her relief. Perfect. I knew she'd take the opportunity to see Scott again. By Friday morning, I packed a bag and pretended to leave for my trip. Instead, I checked into a small motel a few blocks from the Cove Hotel and waited. Sure enough, by Friday evening, Rachel's car was parked outside the Cove, right next to Scott's. I snapped more photos and sent them to Linda. We're ready, I texted her. Linda replied, understood. Let me know when to file. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to just walk away. I wanted Rachel to feel the weight of her choices. The next morning, I walked into the hotel lobby, divorce papers in hand. Excuse me, I said to the desk clerk, showing her a photo of Rachel. Can you tell me which room this guest is staying in? I need to deliver these to her. The clerk hesitated, but after some persuasion, she gave me the room number. Standing outside the door, my heart pounded. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped short. Instead, I texted Rachel, surprise. I'm here. Open the door. A few seconds later, I heard muffled voices and panicked shuffling inside the room. The door opened a crack, and Rachel stood there, her face pale. What are you doing here? She stammered. I held up the papers. I think you know. As Scott appeared behind her, looking confused and irritated, I handed Rachel the documents. Consider this your notice, I said calmly. We're done. Her jaw dropped, but before she could respond, I turned and walked away. As I walked out of the hotel, my emotions churned in a chaotic storm. Anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life. Rachel's shocked face was burned into my memory, but I wasn't done yet. When I reached my car, I took a deep breath and called Linda. It's done, I told her. Good, Linda said. I'll file the papers on Monday. Do you want me to send a copy to her directly, or will you handle that? Send it to her, I replied. I don't want to deal with her anymore. With that, I ended the call and drove away, leaving Rachel and Scott to figure out their next steps. Back at the motel, I collapsed onto the bed. The adrenaline rush had faded, leaving me exhausted. But as I lay there, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. Rachel, what the hell is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, I typed out a response. Me, because you threw away everything we had for him. I'm done pretending I don't know. Her reply came almost immediately. Rachel, we need to talk. Please come back. I didn't respond. The next day, I received another text, but this one wasn't from Rachel. It was from Scott. Scott, stay away from us. You don't want to make this worse for yourself? I laughed out loud, incredulous. The audacity of this man to threaten me after what he and Rachel had done was almost comical. Me, don't worry, Scott. I have no interest in her anymore. You're welcome to everything that comes with her. His response was a string of expletives, which I ignored. On Monday morning, Linda called me with an update. The papers are filed, she said. Rachel has 30 days to respond. If she contests, we'll deal with it. Otherwise, it'll be a straightforward process. Thanks, Linda, I said. By the way, she added, her tone cautious, you might want to brace yourself. If she decides to fight this, it could get ugly. Let her try, I replied. She's already lost me. What else does she have left to fight for? That evening, Rachel showed up at the house. I had half expected her to. She banged on the door, calling my name. Open the door, she shouted. We need to talk. I hesitated but eventually opened it, if only to get her to stop causing a scene. She stood there, her face flushed with anger and tears. What are you doing to me? Why are you throwing this all away? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Me? I'm not the one who threw anything away, Rachel. You did that the moment you started sneaking around with Scott. Her expression shifted, guilt flashing across her face. It wasn't like that, she protested. It just happened. Stop, I interrupted, holding up my hand. I don't want to hear your excuses. You made your choice and now I'm making mine. But we can fix this, she pleaded, stepping closer. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can get past this. I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and disgust. You don't get it, do you? This isn't something we fix. You didn't just hurt me. You betrayed everything we built together. There's no coming back from that. She stood there, stunned, as I closed the door in her face. Through the window, I watched as she stood on the porch for a moment before finally walking away. I thought that was the end of it. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. Hello? I answered cautiously. This is Scott, the voice on the other end said. My grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? We need to talk, he said, his tone serious. It's about Rachel. What about her? I asked, suspicion creeping in. There was a pause before he replied. She's been lying to both of us. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street. You'll want to hear this. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Scott was already there, looking uncharacteristically tense. He motioned for me to sit down. What's this about? I asked, crossing my arms. Scott leaned forward, lowering his voice. Rachel told me you were abusive. That's why she said she stayed with me, that she was afraid to leave you. I stared at him, stunned. That's a lie, I said firmly. I've never laid a hand on her. I figured, Scott admitted, but that's not the only thing. She's been seeing someone else, someone who isn't either of us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? She's been using us both, Scott said bitterly. I found texts on her phone. There's another guy, someone she's been seeing for months. As his words sank in, a mix of anger and betrayal surged through me. Rachel wasn't just unfaithful. She was playing us all for fools. I thought I meant something to her, Scott said, shaking his head. But now I realize I was just a convenience. Same as you. For a moment, we sat in silence, two men united by the realization of how thoroughly we'd been deceived. "I guess we're both better off without her," I finally said. Scott nodded. "Yeah, but she's not going to let either of us go without a fight." His words felt like a warning. A storm was coming, and Rachel was at its center. Scott's warning lingered in my mind as I left the coffee shop. Rachel wasn't someone who gave up easily. She always needed control, needed to win. And now that both Scott and I were untangling ourselves from her web, I knew she wouldn't take it lying down. A few days passed quietly, but I was constantly on edge. Then, late one night, the storm broke. I was jolted awake by the sound of someone pounding on my front door. The clock read 2:13 a.m. I grabbed my phone and cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. It was Rachel. She was disheveled, tears streaming down her face. "Open the door, please," she cried, her voice cracking. I debated ignoring her, but her cries grew louder. Not wanting to wake the neighbors, I cracked the door open. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked coldly. "I need to talk to you," she said, pushing her way inside. I stepped back, letting her in but keeping my distance. She paced the living room, wringing her hands. "They're turning against me," she blurted out. "Who?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Scott, everyone," she said, her voice trembling. "Scott's telling people lies about me, and now my friends are cutting me off. Even my family is questioning me. I have no one left." I raised an eyebrow. "And whose fault is that?" Rachel stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "I made mistakes, okay? But I didn't deserve this. Scott is saying I cheated on him too, but that's not true. Isn't it?" I asked, my voice calm but firm, because he seemed pretty convinced when we talked. Her eyes widened. "You talked to Scott?" I nodded. "And he told me everything. About the other guy. So don't stand here and play the victim." Her face turned red with anger. "You're just as bad as he is. I came here because I thought you'd understand, but you're just trying to tear me down too." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Rachel, you made your choices. You don't get to rewrite the story now that the consequences are catching up to you." She stared at me, her expression hardening. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "If that's how you want to play it, you'll regret this." The next day, I found out what she meant. Linda called me, her voice tight with frustration. "Rachel's contesting the divorce," she said. I wasn't surprised. "Of course she is. She's also making some accusations," Linda continued hesitantly. "She's claiming you were emotionally abusive and that you neglected her during the marriage." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "She's grasping at straws." "She is," Linda agreed. "But we'll need to be prepared. If this goes to court, things could get messy." As the weeks passed, the situation escalated. Rachel's accusations grew more outlandish, and she started spreading rumors about me to mutual friends and even my workplace. But then, something unexpected happened. Scott reached out again, this time with evidence, texts, emails, and even photos that contradicted Rachel's claims. He'd done his own digging, uncovering a pattern of deceit and manipulation that spanned years. "She's a master at playing the victim," he said during our meeting. "But this time, she's overplayed her hand." With Scott's evidence in hand, I felt a renewed sense of determination. When the court date finally arrived, Rachel walked in with her lawyer, exuding confidence. But as the proceedings unfolded and Scott's evidence was presented, her facade began to crack. Her lawyer scrambled to refute the claims, but it was clear that Rachel's lies were unraveling. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, finalizing the divorce and dismissing Rachel's accusations as baseless. I thought that was the end of it, but a week later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a single piece of paper with a cryptic message. "You may have won this round, but I'm not finished." The message in the envelope unsettled me, but I tried to brush it off. Rachel had lost. She was likely just trying to rattle me. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, strange things began happening. It started with phone calls, numbers I didn't recognize, hanging up the moment I answered. Then came the emails, anonymous accounts accusing me of being a liar and a cheater. At first, I ignored them, but the messages grew more personal, referencing private details from my life. Rachel was behind this. I was sure of it. One evening, I received a call from Scott. "Hey, I think you should know something," he said, his voice hesitant. "What's going on?" I asked. "Rachel's been talking to people in my circle again. She's spinning some wild story about how you orchestrated everything. Our meeting, the evidence, even the divorce outcome." I groaned. "Unbelievable. Does she have any proof?" "Of course not," Scott said. "But you know how she operates. She doesn't need proof, just enough noise to sow doubt." I decided to confront Rachel directly. I didn't want to play her games anymore. I found her at a local cafe, sipping coffee and chatting with a friend. When she saw me, her smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Ryan," she said sweetly, "what a surprise." "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Her friend glanced between us, sensing the tension. "I'll give you two some space," she said, gathering her things and leaving. Once we were alone, Rachel leaned back in her chair, feigning indifference. "What's this about?" "Cut the act, Rachel," I said. "I know you're the one behind the calls, the emails, and the rumors. It needs to stop." She smirked. "Oh, Ryan, always so paranoid. Do you have proof?" Her smugness lit a fire in me. "Not yet," I said, "but I will." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You think you've won, don't you? That you're finally free of me. But you'll never be free, Ryan. I'll make sure of it." That night, I started digging. If Rachel was going to keep coming after me, I needed to be ready. With Scott's help, we traced some of the anonymous emails back to Rachel's IP address. It wasn't enough to take legal action yet, but it was a start. Then came the breakthrough. Scott called me late one night. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "What is it?" "Rachel's been blackmailing someone, one of her so-called friends. Apparently, she's been using their dirty secrets to get them to spread her lies." He forwarded me a series of texts between Rachel and the friend, detailing her scheme. Armed with this new evidence, I went to my lawyer. We filed a cease and desist letter, warning Rachel of legal consequences if she didn't stop her harassment. The next day, I received a frantic call from her. "You didn't have to do this," she shouted. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No, Rachel," I said calmly. "I'm protecting myself. This ends now." In the weeks that followed, the harassment stopped. Rachel disappeared from my life completely. I'd like to say that was the end of it, but Rachel always thrived on drama. A part of me knows she might resurface someday with another scheme or another lie. But for now, I'm free, and that's all that matters.